Hey there! Do you remember our data factory pipelines that we used to connect to a data lake? For example, to save data from Azure SQL database? Well, they worked, right? But I kind of ignored the fact that we have to authenticate somehow to be allowed to access this resource. And actually, security stuff, when it comes to accessing our data, is super important. Especially when you think that in case of various architectures, like this Lakehouse one, the data lake is the only place where you store your data. So it is super important to secure it. And basically that's the topic for today. So let's get started. All right, so security. Let's talk about the way we can restrict access to our precious data. And I know that might not be the super interesting stuff, but trust me, it is very important. You don't want to wake up one day to realize that there was a data breach and someone just stole all of your data, including the ones that contain some PII data. No, we want to avoid this stuff. All right, so today let's make a short overview about security, and I will focus on a security related to data lake. And please note that I will skip the networking stuff. Let's put it aside. Maybe we will get back to it one day, but today I want to focus on some other things. So, when we think about getting access to some resource, like data lake, there are basically two phases of getting the access that happen basically everywhere. So let me explain what they are and what they mean. So the first stage is simply authentication. Authentication. Right? And it simply means that I want to prove that I am who I claim I am. So for example, let's say I want to get access to a data lake, and I have to prove that it is really me, that it is really Piotr, who is trying to get access to this resource. And basically we've got three categories of methods we could use to authenticate. The first one is simply something I know, like a password, login and password. I believe that's still the most commonly used method to authenticate around the world. Everyone uses it. And in theory, it should be only me who knows the password. And that's why it's so important to not share your passwords and not to reuse the same password across various services, various places. Because if it is compromised in one place, well, it is compromised everywhere. And for sure, guys, don't use the same password for your online banking. So protect your money. The second type, or the second category of authentication methods we can think of is something I have. For example, I might have a mobile phone with some software installed, like Microsoft Authenticator or Okta, that I have to use to click and approve the login request. Or I might have used it to type in the number that I see on the screen, just to prove that it is really me who is trying to get access. And again, in theory, if someone is in a possession of this device, like a mobile phone, it should be only the person who we believe should be granted the access, right? So, because I don't really share my mobile phone with someone else, so if someone clicks approve button on this mobile device, it is a good indication that it was really me. And the last category you can think of is something I am, like my fingerprint, like my face scan or my eye scan. So these are those three most commonly used categories of the ways we can use for authentication purposes, for proving that it is really us who is trying to get access. And now, no matter how complex password you select, it can be breached. It's just a matter of time and resources. So, as a good practice, it is advised to use at least 2 categories of those authentication methods at the same time. For example, to get access to Azure, you might have to provide your username and the password. And apart from that, you might need to approve the login request using Microsoft Authenticator app. And whenever we have to use, or whenever we use 2 or more authentication methods, well, that's simply multi-factor authentication, MFA. And if we use exactly 2 of them, it's two-factor authentication, which is way more secure than even when you use a super long and super complex password. So using these multiple factors is really a good idea to secure your data. Alright, so let's say that we authenticated somehow using one of those methods, and we proved that it is really us, or it is really a data factory who is trying to connect to a data lake. Now what? What is the next phase? Well, and the second phase is authorization. Authorization. And it is simply about checking what authenticated principal can do. So let's say I logged in successfully, and now can I read the data? Can I write the data? Can I delete the data? Well, that's what authorization is all about. It is just about setting what kind of access, what kind of permissions I am granted. So the authentication is the first part of our process of getting access to some resource, and authorization is the second part. And basically those 2 things, and they occur everywhere. Now, I told you that I want to focus those several security sessions around data lake. So let's talk for a moment about data lake and how it looks like. So you should know already, you should remember that storage account is the service that we use when we want to have a data lake. And let's assume that we have such structure of our data lake. Let's say that we have a row container, like so, that has multiple directories. Let's say we might have a directory for every source system we ingest, like for SAP. Then within this SAP directory, we might have multiple directories, each for every dataset we ingest. For example, for sales. Then let's say we might have already our files. Let's keep the whole structure that we discussed previously in one of the previous episodes, and let's keep it simple and short. So let's say that here we've got our files, some data file. Let's say it is a CSV file. And obviously we might have multiple such files. Let's say data2 CSV, like so. Then apart from our row container, we might have other ones, like standardized, or whatever name we use, whatever makes sense in our case. So let's call it standardized. Standardized. That again would have some directories. Let's say SAP and maybe some files and so on. And then let's say that we also have a container called public, inside which we would like to store the data that we would like to make publicly available. And let's say for simplicity that we don't have any directories inside it, that we've got some files stored inside our public container. Alright, so this is our data lake. Let me encapsulate it into a rectangle to indicate that yes, this is our data lake, which is a part of a storage account, right? And now, apart from data lakes or blob storages, in case we don't use these hierarchical namespaces, please remember that storage account is something more than just this single service. It has multiple sub-services under the hood. It has actually 3 more that we covered in one of the previous episodes. But let me quickly draw them. So we've got those 3 additional services. The first one is files or file shares. File shares. Then we've got tables. And we've got queues. And all of that together is our storage account. So let me indicate that all of this is our storage account. Alright, so this is our wonderful storage account. Now, in these security episodes, I will focus on a data lake only, on this blob storage part, the one that is used the most often in case of big data solutions. But please be aware that some of the approaches that I will be talking about, they apply also to other services inside storage account. But the primary goal is to focus on a data lake. And before we go further, let's make sure that we understand the names that apply for a data lake. So those black things that I drew at the top, like raw, standardized, and public, they are called containers. So this is a container. And container, simply put, is just this top level directory inside our data lake. And we might have multiple of them, like in this case we've got raw, standardized, and public. In the past they were called file systems. So let me write an old name, file system. So sometimes in some older documentation or some in various APIs, you might still find this file system name. But please remember that it means just a container, this top level directory. Then in case of data lakes, we might have those real directories, those blue ones. Like in our case, SAP and sales. Those are our directories. Directory. And please remember that in case of data lake, they do exist. They are physical things. And finally, those orange ones, well, they are simply our files. Files or blobs, if you prefer this name. Binary long objects, large objects, sorry. So that's the naming convention I will use when I will be talking about the different authentication methods. Alright, so that's the structure that we will use to test various approaches. So let's make sure that we have this structure in our data lake. So let me switch to Azure portal, and here we've got our table data lake demo storage account, which is configured as a data lake, so you can reuse it. And here in the containers, we can see that we already have two of them. We've got row and test, and the ones created by Azure called logs. We'll skip it. Now in our row container, we've got already some directories that we created when we were ingesting data from Azure SQL database. So let me simply add new directory like we had in our diagram called SAP. Let me go inside this directory and let me create another one called sales. And let me add some file to our sales directory. So I've got some file here. So let me simply upload this CSV file. All right. So we have some data uploaded to a sales directory inside subdirectory inside row container. Great. So what I would like to do next is to create our public container. So let me create it. Container called public. And let me add some file to it. And I will upload an image that in a second we would like to make public. So it could be accessed by everyone. All right. So we have our structure. Great. So now, when we think about getting access to some resource, well, getting access to a data lake to be more precise. So access to data lake. We can basically split it into two categories. So the first one I want to talk about is called, let me call it without identity or no identity. No identity. And here we'll have different approaches in case of which we don't really know who is trying to connect, who is trying to get access to our data. Because the identity of this principal is not available. Of course, we will know from where someone tries to connect, like what IP he's using, but in many cases that's not enough, because many persons may use the same IP address. So if we have some data breach and we don't know who was the person trying to do something bad with our data, well, that's a bad situation. But we've got those type of options when we talk about getting access to a data lake. On the other hand, we've got a second type of methods that we'll cover later on. And here we know who is trying to connect. So we have the identity of the person or of the service that is trying to connect. So for example, we will be able to tell that it was really me, it was really Piotr, who was trying to connect. But for now, let's focus on those no identity methods. All right. And the first option we have here is simply, well, let's configure anonymous access. Anonymous access. So basically we say, actually, we will allow everyone to read our data. We don't care any authentication at all. We want to make our data publicly available, just to everyone. And yeah, we've got this possibility. Of course, in the case of our data analytics solutions, it is rarely a case to use this type of method because we want to protect our data. We don't want to make them public. But hey, that option exists and I want to cover it. All right. So you should remember that we created this public container that has this Winnie JPEG file available inside it. Now, if I view its properties, take a look that I have its URL. So let me copy it, and simply this is the URL that points to this particular file. And it means that this file can be accessed just via a web browser. So let's verify how it looks like. So let me open a new incognito window. So I am not logged in as me. I'm pretending that I'm someone just from the internet. And let me paste the link to this image, to this file, and take a look that actually the URL, well, it has several parts. So first of all, we've got the name of our data lake. That's why we've got to make them unique. Then we've got this blob core Windows net suffix that is always appended to these URLs. And then we've got the path to our file, like public container, and then our Winnie JPEG. All right, so let's try to open this file. And by default, I am not granted the access, because it would be really bad if by default our data stored in a data lake would be publicly available just to anyone. And the error we got might be kind of misleading because it says resource not found. And actually it is the case that we don't have access to this file. So the error might confuse you. All right, so what can we do to make this file available to anyone? So let's go back to our data, to our portal, to our data lake, and take a note that here at the list of the containers, we've got this column called anonymous access level, which right now is set to private for every container. And it simply means that we didn't allow for anonymous access in case of given container. It is set at the container level. But what if we would like to make our public container, well, public? Well, simply let's select it and use this change access level button. And then let's choose one of the available options. And we've got three. The first one, private, no anonymous access, that is currently set. It means no one, principals that didn't authenticate, they don't have access. Simple as that. Then remaining two, blob and container, they will grant access to everyone. So setting any of those two options will do the trick. The difference between them is that in case of blob access level, we will not allow users to list, to enumerate our blobs from this container. If we grant them container access level, we will grant them access to list all files stored in our container. So that's the difference. So if we use the a little bit more secure option, the blob one, then the user would have to know exactly the full URL to our file to get access to it. So actually, let's use this option, blob. And here you can see the tooltip that this option will allow for reading by anonymous requests, mainly basically for everyone. And that those requests will not be able to enumerate the blobs. All right, so let's do this. And you can see instantly that the access level for our public container was changed from private to blob. So let's see whether it changed anything. So let me go back to our in private tab. Let's refresh the browser and see what happens. And yes, now I can see the image. So even though I didn't authenticate, I didn't provide any credentials, I was able to get access to the data. So that's how this anonymous access works. So let's write the most important stuff about it in our whiteboard. So first of all, it is a read-only access, which is really good. So read-only. We really don't want to grant just anyone access in a way that he will be able to modify our data. No, this anonymous access, those blob and container access levels, they will grant only a read access. Permissions to read our data, not to modify it, not to add, not to delete. And secondly, you can see that this anonymous access level column, it is visible at the container level, at this top level one, but it's not visible at the file level. Likewise, it is not visible at the directory level, which simply means that this anonymous access, it is set at the container level. Container level. And let me quickly recap what we mean by container. So again, container is this top level directory, like in our case, raw, standardized, and public. So we can either grant anonymous access to the whole container, like this raw one, and then we'll have access to everything inside it, or not grant access at all. It is not possible to be more granular than a container, like grant anonymous access to this particular file or to this sales directory. No, in case of anonymous access, it is set at the container level. All right, so probably right now you realize that this authentication method is quite dangerous, especially if someone set it by mistake and then exposes the data to everyone. So it would be great if we could somehow prevent users from setting this option. And is it possible? Yeah, fortunately it is. So to do this, we have to go to the storage account, and somewhere here in the configuration under settings, there is this allow blob anonymous access setting, which right now I have set to enabled, so I can set this anonymous access. If I switch it to disabled, then no longer this anonymous access will be able to could be set. So let me disable it and let's save this. All right, so right now let's go back to our browser and let's refresh the data and let's see what happens. And this time I cannot see the data, but the error is a bit different. Public access not permitted. Previously we had something like resource not found, but here we explicitly know that we cannot get the access to the file because the public access, the anonymous access on this container or this storage account as a whole is disabled at all. So even though we can still see this blob set as an anonymous access level in case of our public container, it is not valid anymore because we have this global setting at the storage account level, which overrides those settings. So even if you would like to change the level of access for this particular container, you will see that actually it's grayed out and I can't change it because it is set at the storage account level that public access is not allowed. So to be able to make it public, I would have to go first to our storage account, modify the settings there, and then go back here and make changes. So that's how we can protect our data from accidental exposures. Alright, but in general, we won't be using this anonymous access in our data analytics solutions. No, we want to protect the data. So for sure, there are some better ways of protecting it. And they are, obviously. So let's move on to the next method we could use to get access to our data. And we are still in this no identity area, so we will still not know who is connecting to the data. And the method I'm talking about is simply the access key. Access key. And how does it work? So, in our storage account, we've got this access keys section under security and networking. So let's take a look at it. And basically, we've got two access keys, key 1 and key 2. By default, when we open this window, they are obfuscated. We don't see their values. We have to explicitly click show to see our key. And why? Well, simply because those access keys, they give us admin permissions on the whole storage account. So they are extremely powerful. So one more time, those access keys, they give full access, admin permissions. So if we know this particular value, which is just a string, then we can do everything with our storage account. And not only a data lake, but the whole storage account. We can even remove it. So it gives us full access to data lakes, file shares, tables, and queues. Extremely powerful way of getting access to our storage account. So let me write it down that it gives us full access. And it cannot be restricted. It's if you use access key, then you've got full access. And secondly, it is set at the storage account level. So previously, in case of anonymous access, we could set it container by container. Here, when using access keys, it's set for the whole storage account. And basically, because it gives us so powerful permissions, it is highly advised to not use it at all, unless there is no other way to connect to your data. So let me draw a big red stop sign. Don't use access keys, really. If you spot in your projects that you are using access keys, then start asking questions. Why are we using them? Do we really need that level of access? Probably not. Probably it was set this way because honestly, that's the easiest way to get access. It's the fastest way. This method is often used in various tutorials when the goal of the session is not about security, but about some other things. And this feature, well, it just needs some access to a data lake. And using the access key is the fastest and the simplest way. But don't do this unless that's the only resort. Well, there might be a case when you work with some legacy software or some solution which is not able to connect to authenticate to a data lake in any other way than access keys. In such case, you can use it. But otherwise, I highly recommend to not use access keys because it's too dangerous. You might accidentally remove data and make a mess. So don't. Simply don't. Now, If you use those access keys for any reason, then protect them at any cost, because it's way too easy to leak them. Take note, they are just strings, like passwords. And if you give this access key to someone, well, you have actually no control over it anymore. This person, well, it could send this key to someone else and someone else and so on. And then when someone authenticates to a storage account using this key, you don't know who this person is, because it's just a key, right? So protect this value. And now even me showing you this value, it should be treated as a security incident. It shouldn't be exposed like this. And for sure, do not hard code this key like another password in your software. Later on, we will talk about better ways to secure this type of secrets. So let me hide this. All right, so we have these super powerful access keys, but why do we have two of them? Wouldn't a single key be enough? And well, actually, it makes sense. So let's say we've got some application that uses, we've got an app that uses the first key to authenticate, to connect. For some reason, bad thing, but it was implemented this way. And let's say that we suspect that this key has been compromised and we've got to change it to a new value, so the old key would stop working. Now, to do not cause any downtime on our app, what we should do would be like this. Reconfigure our app to use the second key, then rotate the first key, and rotation the key, it simply means generate a new value, so the old value will stop working. And then if we want to still use the first key, reconfigure our application again to connect using the access key 1. This way, our application will be always up and running. It won't have any downtime. If we simply rotated the key without any changes in the application, well, for the time between the key rotation and the update in our app, it won't be able to connect to our data lake, to our storage account. And let me actually show you how this rotate functionality works. So take a note that right now my key starts with this 6NVW something. So if I suspect that this value is compromised, I will just rotate the key. And yes, I want to do this. And in a second, I have a new key value. The previous one, it stopped working. And again, I can do it multiple times. And as a best practice, you might want to rotate your keys periodically, just to avoid a situation or to prevent a situation when the key that was leaked, it is constantly being used. So you might use this rotation reminder to remind you to rotate the key, let's say every quarter or so, depends on your requirements. And I said that this account key, or actually access key, how it is called here, it is a dangerous method. It gives way too more permissions that we usually need. But actually, how did we connect to data from Data Factory during our dynamic session? So let's jump into Data Factory and let's take a look at the linked service, which is the thing where we defined when we define the connection string and the way to connect. And we've got this ADLS linked service that connects to data lake. And actually, take a look. The authentication type we used is the account key. exactly what I said. It was very easy to set it up, but it's dangerous. So in your projects, don't do this. And actually, let me create a new linked service to a data lake to show you how we can select this authentication method. So data lake gen 2, that's our service to which we want to connect. And here we've got the drop down where we can choose the way we want to authenticate. Oh, come on. One more time. And we've got multiple options like account key and some other ones that we'll cover in the future. For now, if we choose the default one, and please note that by default, ADF will try to connect using account key, which is extremely dangerous. We just need to select our data lake, our storage account, and it's done. The key has been automatically retrieved. It works. If I test the connection, it should work, provided that the networking stuff is taken care of. Access account key. Yes. And by the way, take a note that here it is called account key in the data factory, and in storage account in the portal it is called access key. Two different names, but they refer to the same thing, those powerful access keys. So let me actually create our linked service like so. And take a note, if we take a look at the JSON code of this linked service, and you should remember that all objects inside Data Factory are stored as JSON files, you can see that actually we've got this encrypted credential with some cryptic string, but basically this is our access key. Fortunately, it is not stored in a plain text, it is encrypted, but still it is just hard-coded inside our linked service, which is a bad practice. There are better ways to handle this, and we'll cover that in the future. But that's access key. Extremely powerful, extremely dangerous, and I advise not to use it. And actually, Microsoft is aware of this thing, that those access keys, well, they are very powerful, and many administrators would like to disable them at all. And is it possible? Yeah, of course. So basically, in the same place where we can disable the anonymous access, which is configuration of our storage account, we have this second option, allow storage account key access, which is right now enabled in my case, so I can use them to authenticate. If I would like to make my environment more secure, I would simply disable it, and then those access keys couldn't be used to connect to authenticate. All right, and let's stop it here. We'll cover more methods in the future episodes, but simply let's recap what we learned today. So first of all, security is very important. The way we protect our data, the way we check who is trying to connect, and granting them access is super important. And today we learned two methods about getting access to a data lake. The first one is anonymous access that allows us to just expose a specific container to basically everyone. The good thing is that it is only a read access without a possibility to modify anything, but probably not to be used way too often. Maybe if you have some dataset for training purposes, that's fine. That's how Microsoft does it when they expose various datasets. The other way to authenticate, to connect, is by using the access key or by the account key, how Data Factory calls it. But here it is very dangerous because it grants full access to the whole storage account. and we still don't know who is using this access key. So super dangerous, super powerful. If possible, it is recommended to disable it at all at the storage account level. Alright, so that's enough for today. I hope it was useful. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Take care.